You are a rot. I would rather have no daughter than a thief. Get out before I call the police and let you rot in a cell." My father screamed those words as he dragged my suitcase to the door and hurled it into the mud. $85,000 was missing from the wall safe, and my sister Jade had just delivered the performance of a lifetime. She sat on the sofa, clutching her stomach and sobbing that she saw me memorize the code, which was her birthday, claiming I stole the money to feed a gambling addiction I did not even have. That was all the proof he needed. I looked at Mark, my fiancé, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he turned his back and stood next to Jade. The betrayal was total. I walked out into the rain, picked up my muddy bag, and looked back one last time. Jade stopped crying for exactly 1 second to flash me a triumphant smirk. I turned around and walked away without a word. I drove until my gaslight blinked red, ending up at a motel on the edge of town where the neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I peeled off my wet clothes, my hands shaking so hard I could barely work the buttons. As I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, shivering despite the heat blasting from the vent, the grief finally gave way to a cold, hard realization. I was not just a daughter they had rejected. I was an investment they had liquidated. For years, I had been the invisible spine holding that family upright. They called Jade the miracle baby because she was born 10 years after me. Fragile and demanding. I was just the draft horse. When I was 22, freshly out of college with a signing bonus from my first audit firm, my father sat me down. He told me he had made some bad investments, and the house was at risk. I wrote a check for $12,000 without blinking. I thought I was buying security. I did not know I was paying off his first round of gambling debts. It became a pattern. I was the one auditing my mother's chaotic credit card statements on weekends, finding ways to trim budgets so they could afford Jade's lifestyle. 2 years ago, Jade claimed she wanted to go to design school. The tuition was $10,000. My parents looked at me with those expectant, puppy dog eyes, claiming they were tapped out. I paid it directly to Jade. 3 weeks later, I saw photos of her on Instagram, drinking margaritas in a cabana in Tulum. When I confronted my parents, my mother waved a hand and said Jade needed to find herself before school started. She never went to class. The money vanished, and I was told to stop being so controlling. But the financial leeching was nothing compared to the psychological warfare Jade had waged on Mark. I sat in that motel room, replaying the last 6 months, and the pieces finally clicked into place. Jade had not just improvised that lie about the gambling addiction in the living room. She had been planting seeds for months. It started with small things. She would leave brochures for addiction support groups on my coffee table when Mark was coming over, then swipe them away quickly, acting flustered when he walked in. She would whisper to him at family dinners, asking if I seemed manic or on edge. I found out later she had even forged receipts withdrawals from ATMs near casinos and left them in my car where Mark would find them. She played the concerned sister perfectly, telling him she was worried I was spiraling, that I was borrowing money from dangerous people. Mark, the man who was supposed to know me, did not ask me a single question. When the safe was found empty, he did not see a crime. He saw the confirmation of a narrative Jade had been writing for half a year. I was never the fiancé to him. I was a liability waiting to happen. I looked at my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. My eyes were red, my hair matted with rain. They thought they had broken me. They thought that by stripping me of my home, my fiancé, and my reputation, I would fade away. But they made a critical error. They forgot what I did for a living. I did not just pay bills. I hunted discrepancies. I tracked hidden assets. They had just given me the motivation to turn my professional lens on my own family. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to audit them. 2 years of silence is a long time. It gives you plenty of room to think, to replay every conversation, and to analyze every look. I was living in a small studio apartment across town, working as a junior forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm. I wasn't wealthy yet, but I was stable. I paid my own rent. I bought my own groceries. And most importantly, I slept with the door double locked. I thought I had moved past the worst of the hurt until my phone buzzed on a Tuesday night. It was my mother, Kimberly. It was the first time she had reached out since the night in the rain. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, foolishly hoping for an apology. Maybe they had found the truth. Maybe they missed me. I opened the message. Susie, Jade, and Mark are finalizing the wedding plans. Your father still refuses to speak your name, but I think it is time you made amends. Send a substantial gift to the registry. Show them you are ready to atone for your mistakes. And maybe we can discuss letting you come home for Christmas. I dropped the phone on my counter like it was radioactive. Atone. She wanted me to pay a penance for a crime I did not commit. To buy a toaster for the sister who stole my life, and the fiancé who watched it happen. The audacity should have made me scream. Instead, it triggered a cold, analytical switch in my brain. It was the same switch I flipped when I hunted for tax fraud at work. I stopped looking at them as my parents and started looking at them as subjects. I sat down and asked myself the question that had haunted me for 2 years. Why did my father believe the lie so easily? James was a man who counted every penny at the grocery store. He was paranoid about money. Yet, when Jade claimed I had a gambling addiction, something I had never shown a single sign of, he bought it without asking for a shred of proof. He did not ask to see a betting slip. He did not check my bank account. He just exploded. Then, the memory hit me. It was a fragment from when I was 16, cleaning out his truck. I had found a stack of small, red receipts stuffed between the seats. They weren't for gas or lumber. They were from the Okmulgee River Casino. When I asked him about them, he turned purple. He snatched them away, screaming that I was snooping, that I was an ungrateful brat who didn't respect privacy. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a vault lock. My father wasn't angry because he thought I was a gambler. He was angry because he was a gambler. He had been fighting that demon in the dark for years, hiding losses as bad investments. When Jade accused me, she didn't just frame me. She handed him a psychological life raft. He projected his own shame onto me. By punishing me, he was subconsciously punishing himself, purging his own sins by casting out the addict in the family. He wasn't a righteous patriarch protecting his retirement. He was a hypocrite, terrified of his own reflection. That realization killed the last bit of grief I was holding on to. You can't grieve for people who use you as a psychological dumping ground. I looked at my mother's text again. I didn't reply. I didn't block the number. I simply opened my laptop and created a new encrypted folder. I named it The Liability. I wasn't going to send a wedding gift. I was going to collect the debt they didn't even know they owed. The daughter was gone. The auditor was officially on the case. 4 years after I walked out into the rain. I wasn't just surviving. I was the predator. I had reinvented myself as a specialist in distressed asset management. My job was simple. I bought bad debts from banks' defaulted mortgages, failed business loans for pennies on the dollar, and then I either restructured them or seized the collateral. I was good at it. I was ruthless. I worked from a corner office in downtown Savannah, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlooked the city that had tried to chew me up. I kept a digital eye on my family the whole time. It was a slow-motion car crash. Without my financial spine to hold them up, they had crumbled. Jade had bled them dry. My father's investments had tanked. Mark, my ex-fiancé, was working double shifts to cover Jade's credit card bills, but it wasn't enough. The notification I had been waiting for finally pinged on my server. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. 422 Oak Street. It was time. I didn't knock on their door. I didn't send a letter. I formed a shell company, Phoenix Asset Management. I contacted their bank and bought the non-performing mortgage note on my parents' house. I became their bank. I became the invisible hand holding the roof over their heads. Then, I sent the bait. A courier delivered a heavy, cream-colored envelope to their door. Inside was a lifeline offer. The terms were generous. Phoenix Asset Management would halt the foreclosure, waive the late fees, and restructure the loan to an affordable rate. It looked like a miracle, but there was one condition, buried in Clause 14b. To qualify for hardship relief, the borrower must submit to a forensic financial transparency audit, providing 5 years of unredacted bank statements, tax returns, and digital transaction logs for all household members. They took the bait hook, line, and sinker. They were so desperate to save face, so terrified of the neighbors seeing a foreclosure sign on the lawn, that they boxed up their entire financial lives and shipped it to my P.O. box. They thought they were proving they were poor. They didn't realize they were handing the prosecutor the murder weapon. I sat in my office late one Thursday, a glass of scotch on my desk, and opened the digital files. It didn't take long. Greed is rarely neat. First, I found the theft. I pulled up Jade's bank statements from 4 years ago, the week I was kicked out. There it was. A series of cash deposits. $9,000 on Monday, $8,000 on Tuesday, $9,000 again on Wednesday. She had deposited exactly $85,000 in 7 days, keeping each transaction just under the $10,000 threshold to avoid triggering an automatic IRS report. It is called structuring, and it is a federal crime. She hadn't just stolen from our parents. She had committed bank fraud. But the second discovery was the one that made me set my glass down. I was scrolling through Jade's Venmo logs from the last year. There was a recurring monthly payment of $1,500 to a user named Vernon T88. The memo line was always the same. Consulting. I cross-referenced the name. Vernon was a local personal trainer. I dug deeper into the metadata of the payments. The first one was sent exactly 1 month after Jade announced her pregnancy. I did the math. The dates didn't line up for Mark. He had been away on a business trip during the conception window. But Vernon hadn't. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights reflecting in the glass. Jade was paying hush money. Mark wasn't the father of the child he was raising. She had trapped him with a baby that wasn't his, funded by the money she stole from our parents, all while painting me as the villain. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to hunt anymore. They had mailed me the bullets. Now, all I had to do was pull the trigger. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning at Sterling, Cooper and Associates, a law firm in downtown Savannah that charged more per hour than my father made in a week. I had rented their executive conference room to set the stage. It was a theater of intimidation, floor-to-ceiling glass, a table long enough to land a plane on, and a silence so expensive it felt heavy. I wasn't in the room. I was in the adjacent office, watching the feed from the conference room camera on my laptop. They arrived 15 minutes early. James and Kimberly walked in first, dressed in their Sunday best. My father wore a suit that was 10 years out of style, tight around the shoulders, trying to project the image of a businessman merely experiencing a temporary liquidity issue. My mother wore her pearls, the ones she claimed she would sell if things got bad, but never did. Then came Jade and Mark. Jade was wearing a new designer dress, likely put on a credit card she had no intention of paying. She looked around the room with a hunger that made my stomach turn. She wasn't grateful for the lifeline. She was assessing the furniture. They took their seats around the massive oak table. On the far wall, a 90-inch screen displayed a loading bar with the text, "Connecting to remote CEO." The camera icon in the corner blinked red, indicating the microphone was active, but the screen itself remained black. It was a simple social engineering trick. People assume technology is broken or lagging. They assume that if they cannot see a face, there are no ears in the room. They relaxed immediately. "Nice place," James said, loosening his tie. "This Phoenix group must have deep pockets." "I told you, Kim. We always land on our feet. People recognize quality investments." Kimberly let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. "I was so worried, James. The neighbors. If they saw a foreclosure sign." "They won't," James snapped, his arrogance returning like a reflex. "We just signed the restructuring deal, hand over the paperwork, and we are clear. We will tell everyone we refinanced to buy a vacation home." I watched Mark lean over to Jade. He looked tired, worn down by the financial hemorrhaging of the last few years. But he was smiling now. "We are really going to be okay?" Jade laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. She checked her reflection in her phone screen. "Of course we are, babe. We deserve this. The universe corrects itself." She lowered her voice, but the high-fidelity conference mic picked it up crystal clear. "Besides, imagine if we had to rely on Susie. We would be living in a trailer." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "God, I don't miss her drama. We really dodged a bullet there, didn't we?" "A bullet?" Jade scoffed. "You dodged a nuclear warhead. She was a dead weight, Mark. A gambling addict and a thief. If you had married her, she would have dragged you down to the gutter. Look at us now. We are sitting in a high-rise, about to sign a deal with a major firm. That is what winners do." I stared at the screen. 4 years. 4 years of silence. And their narrative had not shifted an inch. They had not learned a single thing. They were still the victims. Still the heroes of their own twisted story, celebrating their survival on the grave of my reputation. The paralegal entered the room and placed a stack of non-disclosure agreements on the table. "The CEO will join shortly," she said professionally. "Please sign these NDAs. Standard procedure before we discuss the terms of the debt acquisition." They signed without reading. They were signing their lives away, blindingly eager to get to the money. I watched the pens move. James, Kimberly, Mark, Jade. I closed my laptop. I stood up and smoothed the front of my blazer. I didn't need to hear any more. They had just walked into the cage and locked the door from the inside. I picked up the file containing the audit results, the paternity test, the bank statements, the structuring evidence, and walked toward the connecting door. It was time to introduce them to the CEO. The screen on the far wall did not flicker to life. It simply unmuted. My voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers, crisp and devoid of warmth. "I heard that, Jade." Forehead snapped toward the black monitor. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. I waited exactly 3 seconds, long enough for the confusion to curdle into panic, before I pushed open the connecting door. I walked in. I wasn't wearing the muddy jeans and oversized hoodie I had left in. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car. I didn't look at my parents. I walked straight to the head of the table, placed the heavy audit file on the oak surface, and sat down. James was the first to find his voice, though it cracked. "Susie? You are the assistant?" "I'm the owner," I said evenly. I started Phoenix Asset Management 4 years ago. Last week, I bought your non-performing note. I hold your debt. The room went hollow. Kimberly covered her mouth. Mark stared, confused. Jade didn't freeze, she attacked. She's lying, Jade screamed. She's stalking us. She hacked everything. Mark, call the police, she's probably high. I stayed calm and plugged my laptop into the conference table. The screen lit up. No hacking needed, Jade. I said. You FedExed me everything last Tuesday. Exhibit A. Their hardship program bank statements. You said I stole $85,000 from the safe, I said, highlighting the deposits. But your logs show $9,000, $8,000 cash deposits totaling exactly $85,000 over 7 days. James went gray. Finally doing the math. This is structuring, I said in my auditor voice. A federal crime used to dodge IRS reporting. And by submitting this to a financial institution to get a modification, you just put bank fraud and money laundering in writing. James tried to protest, but the numbers were signed and dated. Exhibit B. Jade's Venmo history. I highlighted recurring payments to Vernon T88. Mark, I said. You've been working doubles to cover her cards, right? Wondering where the money went? I zoomed in. These payments start 1 month after she announced the pregnancy. Labeled consulting. I cross-checked the recipient. Vernon isn't a consultant. He's the personal trainer at the gym she joined 5 years ago. Silence. Mark looked at Jade's stomach, then her face realization landing like a punch. Jade? He whispered. She's faking it, Jade shrieked. She made this up. Baby, don't listen, she's jealous. And finally, I said, cutting through her panic. Exhibit C. I played the audio from 5 minutes ago, Jade's voice, clear as glass, trashing them while they thought they were alone. I stopped it. Mark stood so fast his chair crashed backward. Disgust replaced shock. You told me the baby was mine, he said, shaking. You let me sign the birth certificate. You let me pay for everything. Mark. Wait. Jade reached for him. He recoiled. Don't touch me. I folded my hands. Here's the situation. You wanted a bailout. Instead, you handed me written confessions. I have enough to send Jade to federal prison for structuring and fraud, and enough to bury James in legal fees. James finally looked at me, no swagger left. Susie. We're family. No, I said coldly. I'm your creditor. You're in default. I slid one document across the table. I can hand this file to the IRS and the DA this afternoon, or you can sign. Kimberly whispered. What is it? A voluntary surrender of possession. I said. You sign the house over to me today. You vacate in 24 hours with only personal belongings. In return, I shred the IRS whistleblower form. And Jade stays out of prison. 24 hours? Jade gasped. We have nowhere to go. I slept in a Honda Civic for a week, I said quietly. You'll figure it out. I stood. You have 5 minutes. If it isn't signed when I'm back, I'm calling the police. In the hall, 5 minutes felt endless. When I opened the door again, the paperwork sat in the middle, ink still wet. James looked years older. Kimberly cried silently. Mark moved first. I'm filing for an annulment, he said flatly. Don't follow me. Don't call me. If you come near me, I'll show the police that paternity test myself. He walked past me without a word. Jade broke into ugly sobs. Daddy, do something. James tried to summon authority, but it was gone. You can't do this. You won. I didn't win, I said, collecting the signed surrender and tucking the whistleblower form into my briefcase. I balanced the books. The audit is closed. Now get out. Security stepped in, professional, firm, and escorted them out. From the window, they looked small on the sidewalk, arguing, then splitting apart. I drove home my home. Quiet. Clean. A garden I planted. A door that locked. Later, my phone buzzed. Incoming call. Dad. I stared at it, thinking of the girl who waited in the rain 4 years ago. The checks I wrote. The insults I swallowed. I didn't decline. I just watched it ring until the screen went dark. Silence, beautiful. Earned silence. I walk through fire for my justice, and I know I'm not the only one. Have you ever paid for everything and still been treated like nothing? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe blood isn't always thicker than water, hit subscribe. We're building a community of survivors here.